Good morning. Very good to see you all. You all look so bright and ready to learn. Children we have are such a blessing, aren't they? When they go to their class, well, that's something we should not take for granted. We are certainly blessed here at Fairview to have these children with us. If you're visiting with us, welcome. We're glad that you're here for our Bible study this morning. And we're in the book of Acts in chapter 17. We finished 16 last week. Now we're going to begin chapter 17 this week. Paul goes to more than three really, but three main areas are discussed in this chapter. Thessalonica, Berea, and Mars Hill. He's had success in all three places, which we will read and understand, but you're going to see a pattern, if you haven't already seen a pattern, for what Paul and all of his companions have been doing since they've been doing this journey for evangelism. But they go and they find a synagogue, and why do they do that? They go to an area and they go to a synagogue. They're not Jewish. Synagogue of the Jews. So really, that's the general plan. Where was he before this? He was in prison, but what town? Philippi, yeah. Remember we talked about the conversion of Lydia and the conversion of the Philippian jailer, how they had heard the word and they obeyed the gospel. That's where faith comes from. They hear the word and they react to it in the correct way or in a reasonable way. They follow what the word says and obey it. So yeah, he would just come from Philippi, and now he went to Amphipolis. Well, they don't say much about Amphipolis here, but we know this. If you look on a map, that it's about 33 miles from Philippi, and then from Amphipolis to Apollonia was another 30 miles, and then it was 37 miles from Apollonia to Thessalonica. So approximately from where he was in chapter 16 to chapter 17, he had already traveled 100 miles to do the Lord's work. And also here, look at the third word in that verse. Now when they, okay, they is a pronoun. Who is the writer or the penman of the book of Acts? I almost gave it away. Luke. Luke is, okay? So he uses the pronoun they, which means what? He ain't there, okay? He's not there. He probably had stayed behind in Philippi while Paul continued on with the journey. So he's probably staying in Philippi to continue to exhort the brethren there, encourage them, and teach them. And then later on, he's going to meet Paul in Troas. Verse 2, and Paul, as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days, what did he do? Reasoned with them, and then here's actually a more important phrase, last part, of his own personal feelings, of his own personal mind, on his own personal thoughts. No, reasoned with him through the scriptures. Now, did they have the Bible at this time? Not really. You could technically say they did if you want to count the miraculous of knowledge. They had walking Bibles back then, but they didn't have a book. So what did they have in the synagogues? Scrolls that included what we have now, the Old Testament, all right? So he's reasoning with them out of the scriptures. That's a usual plan. Again, he'll enter into a city, and then he'll go and find a synagogue, if there is one. If there's not one, like Lydia, there wasn't one when he started preaching there. He would go in there into the synagogue, and he'll begin the work there. And he uses reasoning of something that's already been written through inspiration of God. Is the Old Testament inspired? Yes, you can be very confident in saying that. Yes, the Old Testament sure is inspired, okay? So, for instance, who wrote Genesis? Who's the penman of Genesis? Anybody know? Moses. Now, Moses wasn't alive when Adam was created, was he? No. And so he had to be inspired in order to pen that book, okay? In fact, he wrote the Pentateuch, the first 5 books there. And, okay, so he reasoned with them out of
the Scriptures, Old Testament Scriptures, to convince them of what? Okay, yes. And so what is the main? Jesus Christ, okay? They had to reason with the Old Testament Scriptures to point out that Jesus of Nazareth is whom God appointed to be the Christ. Now, is Jesus Christ prophesied in the Old Testament? Absolutely. Was he there from the beginning? Can we put an age on Jesus? No, he's always been, okay? He's always been. He had an earthly ministry of around 33 years, but he's the second person in the Godhead. He's been there since the beginning. Okay, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was with God, or was God. The Word became flesh. All right, John chapter 1. Now he appealed to their intellect, and for some reason the Jews rejected the Christ. Two reasons, main reasons. Who can give me one? Why did Jesus get rejected by the Jews? Pride, yeah, their pride for one thing, yes, absolutely. It led him to this. But I'm actually looking for something else. What did they expect? There we go. I probably should have asked it that way because y'all knew the answer. Yeah, they expected him to be an earthly king, to get rid of their oppressors. Who were their oppressors at that time? The Roman Empire was their oppressors. And so he expected them to be an earthly king to overrun or overtake Rome, get them out of the way. Jerusalem can be the kingdom that it once was. That's what they were looking for in the Messiah. Also, number two, what did they despise? Let's see if I can ask this correctly, because something about, let's see, the way he died. Well, the Jews. Let's go to Galatians 3 and 13. I think it's here. Someone read that verse.
Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is every one that hangeth on a tree.
Okay, so to the Jews, the way Jesus died, they considered repulsive. He was a curse. This cannot be the Messiah because he's the one who died on the cross. He hung on a tree, and if anybody who does that is considered a curse, but he's been made a curse for us. Okay, so they failed to see Jesus as the Messiah, and it's based on their own misconceptions. They thought he was going to be an earthly king. That's not true. He's going to be a spiritual king. He is king right now. He is reigning right now at this moment, and he does have a kingdom. Yes, absolutely, and that is what? The church. Okay, the church. The church is his kingdom, and so. And also their own misconception on how he would die. Now, verse 3 of going back to Acts 16, opening and alleging that Christ must needs have suffered and risen again from the dead, and that this Jesus whom I preach unto you is what? Okay, he's opening their minds. How many of you in here have ever been called closed-minded? You don't. Some of you are doing this. That's okay. You don't have to raise your hand. Meaning, what that is, we have scriptural authority. Yes, absolutely, we do. How come we don't have instruments here in worship? How come we don't have a choir? How come we don't have women preachers? How come we observe the Lord's Supper every first day of the week? Not authorized by what? The Scriptures, okay? And so others who do have mechanical instruments in worship, that do have women preachers, that do not observe the Lord's Supper, when we say that's not authorized, what do they say to us? You're closed-minded, okay? We need to get more out of worship. Incorrect. Worship is not for us. Who's it for? God. That's something that I had to finally realize, wait a minute, it's not about me. Okay? It's not about my feelings. It's not about what I think. This is absolutely what God wants. I was told one time when I had a discussion with someone and said, look, I love the Lord so much. Yes, you have to sing, but I love him so much, I want to enhance that singing and I want to play my guitar. That's how much I love the Lord. How do we love the Lord? Keep his commandments, right? So if I add something, if I think he wants this, it's not authorized. So through the scriptures, we need our minds opened, our hearts open. Really, I wouldn't have been a Christian if I didn't have an open mind. You have to understand that. Some of us in here may have grew up in a different kind of church, and you've always believed it this way because that's just traditionally that's what you've always had done. And you thought, hey, I don't see the problem in this. And that's the problem. We don't see. Okay? We have to open our minds, not keep it closed to our old ways and to our traditions. We have to open our minds, not to just anything, right? Because there's a balance to that. What if we decide to open our minds and just go around and see what other churches believe? See if I can get something out of the wrong path. Okay? But if I've always been here, I need to open my mind to the scriptures, to what God has said, and then I choose to obey from that. Okay? That's called human reasoning. And so for some, very difficult to overcome that kind of thinking. All right? If I was not open-minded, yes, ma'am. It's unfortunate that some that won't, they'll say, I like the preacher's a comedian. He's pretty funny. Or the drummer is outstanding. Of course, I've told y'all that I was invited to a church one time, but because the drummer was good. Okay? And so that's not the correct way, the correct attitude, the correct mindset. And our mindset is to love God. We love him through keeping the commandments, and we're open our minds only to what he has said in the scriptures here. Now, opening and alleging, okay? Now, we use that word a little bit differently than what's right here. Paul did not assert without proof that Jesus was the Christ, okay? He reasoned with them. So what he's doing here, it comes from a Greek term that means setting forth by argument and proof, okay? He sets forth the scriptures, and the scriptures prove that Jesus is the Christ. And that's what the scriptures have. They contain proof of things, and that there is such thing as fulfilled prophecy. We read the Old Testament, we can read and keep reading about how prophecies have been fulfilled, and we can know certain things. Is what? John 17:17. Truth. Thy word is truth. Yes, ma'am? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. They were stuck in their own traditions, their own misinterpretations, their own pride, things of which they didn't want to give up, position. All these things will cloud a man's judgment or ability to reason what God has said. Can this happen to us today? Yes, sir. And that absolutely. And I pray that you do that, okay? I pray that whatever I'm preaching, that you will read the scriptures that we're studying, and then you will discuss that at home and see. One reason is, if I'm in error, that you'd love me enough to tell me, because I want to preach the truth and teach the truth. I don't want to misinterpret anything And true or false, can I do that? Yeah, I can. I can. It's not intentional. It's not. Some do preach it a different way intentionally to gather a following, but it's not about us.
One of the best preachers I knew converted himself debating Christians.
Is that right?
The more he studied and debated.
The more he studied, then
And out of his marriage to this lady, he said he wasn't a Christian when he married her. He shouldn't have married her, is what he told us. They had 3 sons. 2 are gospel preachers, 1 is an elder.
man, that's great. That's a good story. I mean, I'm glad it ended up that way because a lot of times it doesn't.
She should not have married me, really, but she did.
Yeah, I got a feeling I probably wouldn't have been married if I didn't convert either. So there you go. That's not why I converted, by the way, just in case you have that question. But anyway, but you're right. There are those who will marry outside the faith, and is that sinful? No, it's not. It's not a sin. But is it dangerous?
Yes.
It can be. Absolutely. Because we love our spouse so much that we're willing to open our minds in order to compromise what our spouse believes. Okay, and if he or she believes something else, then most likely, if I'm open-minded in that way, I'm going to follow suit, and therefore I'm going to lose my salvation. We have to do. It's only because of what God says. It's not anything about what I'm saying now. We have to do what this says. Okay, going back to chapter 16, verse 4. Here we go. We got results. Paul preached in the synagogue where there was a crowd. Verse 4, and some of them, what? Believed and consorted with Paul and Silas, and of the devout Greeks, a great multitude, and of chief women, not a few. That's a few, by the way. Many Greek women, chief women, women of rank or power or influence, okay, also believe. Great. When influential people are converted, that could be a really good thing for the cause of Christ. Man, if we could just convert Joel Osteen. Can you imagine if for some reason he started preaching the truth, he converted, started preaching the truth, in that stadium that he has, that church stadium, they start believing him, and then they convert? Now, probably not going to happen. Even if he did convert and started preaching the truth, what do you think would happen to his mansion and in his stadium church and all that? It would probably disappear, okay? And therefore, there's the motivation to continue what he's doing. But anyway, influential people. So we've got a proposition, and just because the truth has been proposed doesn't mean that we've actually proved it to somebody, because it says here some of them believed. It didn't say everybody believed, but Paul, from his lesson, from the scriptures, he proved the proposition. The reaction is a mixed reaction, which is not a surprise. Some believed and some rejected. And so those who believed, they joined themselves to him, or they threw in their lot with Paul. And so a great number, a multitude that we're told here, of Greeks, a goodly number of chief women, persuaded of the truthfulness of Paul's message, which, by the way, is inspired. Now, in the King James, it says some of them believed. Does somebody else have a different word in their version? Persuaded, okay? When you believe in something, you're persuaded in something. And when you're persuaded in something, what is going to follow if you're persuaded? Action. If I persuade somebody that baptism is essential for salvation, what are they going to do? They're going to be baptized, okay? So belief, it's not teaching. Some of them believed and believed only, but also persuaded into action, all right? So Paul here, these Greeks, the multitude of Greeks, they probably were there in the synagogue, but really he addresses later in the book of 1 Thessalonians, the first letter, let's go there. 1 Thessalonians 1, chapter 1, verse 9. If I can speak, I can get it out. Chapter 1, verse 9, 1 Thessalonians. This is what he said to these saints, that what they formerly were. Turn to God from little g gods. Okay, that's the paganism. That's of the Greeks. All right, going back to Acts 16, verse 5. But the Jews, here's the mixed reaction here. 17, verse 5, excuse me. But the Jews which believed not, moved with envy, took unto them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort. This is how low they're willing to stoop, okay? And gathered a company of these lowered or lewd fellows of the baser sort, gathered a company, set all the city on an uproar. There's chaos here. Assaulted the house of Jason and sought to bring them out to the people. So here we go again with the Jews who are envious. They gathered a following. A great multitude of Greeks believed Paul, were persuaded of the preaching, and that made the Jews a little jealous. And so what did they do? They stooped to the lowest level. Those people there, those lewd fellows of the baser sort, these are vile people. Okay, these are people, they have no principles. They're really indifferent about the religion, but what they had done is they had stirred them up or hired them possibly and caused a big riot, caused a big scene or a disturbance. And what does that tell us about how the Jews are? This is what envy does to us. When we're jealous of somebody, we're willing to stoop, or we could be willing to stoop to the lowest level to get back at that person. They were so low that they hired these people, and that just tells us here, jealousy, hatred, it far exceeded their godliness and their love of the truth. These are supposed to be godly people, right? I mean, they're Jews. They went low. This is the reaction of the Jews to the truth that Paul preached. Now, who's Jason? Your reaction is the same as my reaction. I don't know either. I have no idea. Does the Bible tell us who Jason is? Not really. So is it really important? Here's what we do know. He obeyed the gospel. Obeying the gospel is a great thing. It's a noble deed. It's the main thing to do. It's the most important thing to do. So much so that his name was in the book. Verses 6 and 7, and when they found them not, they drew Jason and certain brethren unto the rulers of the city, crying, These that have turned the world upside down are come hither also, whom Jason hath received, and these all do contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, one Jesus. Wow, here's another level of low, because did the Jews really proclaim Caesar as king? Only when they wanted something. Only when they wanted something. Let's read, let's go to Mark chapter 12. They're tempting Jesus here. Mark 12, verses 4, beginning at 14. And when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true and carest for no man, for thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Oh, they're buttering him up is what they're saying. Is it lawful to give tribute to who? Caesar or not? Shall we give or shall we not give? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, here it is, they're a bunch of hypocrites, said unto him, Why tempt ye me? Bring me a penny that I may see it. And they brought it, and he said unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? They said unto him, Caesar's. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Render to Caesar the things that belong to Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. They marveled at it. Okay, did they want to pay tribute to Caesar? but he said that they just said that he is their king. Okay, so there's hypocrisy here. Now, let's go to, let's see, John 19. John 19. And someone please read verse 15.
But they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar.
Hypocrisy. They only claimed him to be king when they wanted something. What did they want right here? They wanted Pilate to say, crucify him. Okay? Why didn't they stone Jesus? Yes, but why did they stone Stephen? They hated Jesus more than Stephen. They wanted Jesus to suffer. They humiliated him. He had such a following. They wanted to bring him down. They wanted to appear. Remember, the Jews rejected Christ because of what other reason? He hung on a tree. That's a curse to the Jews. The king of the Jews wouldn't hang on the tree, right? That's how much hatred they had of Christ. And so because they hated Christ so much, they claimed Caesar is king. We have no king but Caesar. Really. And so going back to Acts 17 here, they were in an uproar. They pulled these brethren out. Incidentally, Paul and Silas weren't there. Okay, so they take the troubled people and the rulers of the city, and when they heard these things, verses 8 and 9, when they had taken security of Jason and the other, they let him go. They didn't have a charge against Jason anyway, because Jason is not the one going around preaching. He will be. Paul and Silas were the ones that are doing that. They weren't there. So they couldn't charge Jason. But what they wanted to do before releasing him, the rulers took a security of him. So no details about the bond, but the purpose for it was likely to keep from raising a disturbance, to calm people down. There's a riot. Why? The Jews were envious. Paul and Silas got a multitude going, got the bigger crowd. This church has more people than this church. So now church B is jealous or envious of church A instead of being grateful that we have more souls added to the kingdom. Right? Same difference here. Jews are losing their following. They're losing their influence. They care nothing about God, though they say they do. They're hypocrites. And so there you go. Any comments? Go ahead. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Hypocritical people. Incidentally, there are those who claim to attend an assembly.
You know, you can go to church with a now to hell with a later, whichever one you want to do.
Is that what they say? Yeah. Well, we are church people, and we're proud church people. Okay. I want to be known as a church person. Why? So I can be a light to the community. So I can influence and talk to people about Christ. Let them know why I have what I have spiritually. Okay. Nothing physically about me that's great because I'm a Christian. But spiritually, I have it all. Okay. You have it all. And so that's something that we should look forward to and be glad about. Okay. All right. So I have a few minutes left. I actually planned on spending the whole class time just on that part in Thessalonica. We got done early. Isn't that something? That doesn't happen with me. So anybody have any comments here? All right. I'll begin with Berea here, and then we'll probably just review it next week. Verse 10 through 14, this is where the scene shifts. They've left Thessalonica and they go to Berea. Now, you'll like Berea. Complete opposite of what the others have done, or it's a rare thing. And the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas. How? By night. Why by night? Safety, yep, safety reasons. Unto Berea, who coming thither went into where? You see a pattern here? Go to where the people are, the synagogue of the Jews. A lot of trouble they had in Thessalonica, and from a human perspective, from what happened to Paul and his companions in Philippi being thrown in jail or prison, being treated the way they were treated, to the uproar and upheaval they had in Thessalonica. Some people, literally, you'll tell them the truth and they get angry. They get mad. It could lead them one or two ways. Well, I'm not going to deal with you anymore, or I'm going to prove you wrong. And you hope they'll want to prove you wrong. And really, they're not proving you wrong. Who are they trying to prove wrong? God. It's God. Really, when we're planting the seed in people and saying, look, this is why we don't use mechanical instruments. This is why we absorb the Lord's Supper. This is why we don't have women preachers. This is why we have elders and deacons and meet every first day of the week. It's because of what the Bible says. Baptism is essential for salvation. Oh, really? Is that a popular belief in the religious world? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They teach it a different way or a different reason or a different time or a different mode or a different way. And then when you tell them what the Bible says, they get angry. Okay? But the seed was... It all depends on software. It's more than a brother. But if we're at it, life, turn them away, all these things. Okay, verse 11. I love this verse. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica. Why? In that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the Scriptures daily, whether those things were so. When you're in the Scriptures every day, the word will be hid in your heart or in your mind that you might not sin against God. Psalm 119. Okay? And when you search the Scriptures daily and someone approaches you and says, you remember Jesus who died on the cross? He was the Messiah. Oh, that's what that meant in Isaiah 53. Of course, they didn't have Isaiah 53 back then, but they had the scrolls, right? Absolutely. So it's easier to reason with people who know the book. Sometimes people have this book memorized, but they don't know it. They misinterpret it or add to or take away or twist it. But if you know the book, you're more likely going to have a softer heart through it. Any more comments on that? Okay. Lord willing, we'll continue to study next week. Thank you so much for your time.